Uh, Good afternoon, everyone, and let me say thank you to the India International Center for organizing this discussion on a new collection of essays titled In Search of Peace for Afghanistan. Uh, the editor of the collection, Jawan Shir Rasikh, is with us today, as are several distinguished contributors to the volume. Afrasiab Khattak, former senator from Pakistan and former head of the Independent Human Rights Tribunal of Pakistan. Barnett Rubin, senior non-resident fellow at the Center for International Cooperation and former advisor both to the SRAP and to the UN Special Representative for Afghanistan. Barney, I think you are all familiar with his work, and you know that he has both written extensively on Afghanistan and is one of the leading experts globally on the peace process in that country. Javed Ludin is the president of the Heart of Asia Society, which is one of the two organizations that have brought out this volume. The other organization is the Qatar Foundation. Uh, Javed is former Deputy Foreign Minister of Afghanistan. And again, is someone who has been deeply involved in the peace process. It looks like we have our moderator, Lakhdar Brahimi, with us. You are, of course, all of you very familiar.
I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear now.
Oh, that's
on my telephone. So, and it's perfect. I can follow the. You can see me and hear me. Can you?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
And we're live now. The session is just started, and let me continue. I have introduced the speakers and the title of the book, and I was just about to introduce you. Mr. Brahimi is a very, very senior UN diplomat who has been involved with Afghanistan at two absolutely critical points. First, during the Najibullah and post-Najibullah period, and then he chaired the Bonn Conference to establish an interim government in Afghanistan and was the special representative of the UN Secretary General for Afghanistan from 2001 to 2004. Mr. Brahimi is the moderator of this session, and I will gratefully hand over to him.
Thank you very, very much, Radha. I do apologize to all of you. As I tried to tell you a minute ago, I am a total illiterate in matters of these new machines. I am of the last century and perhaps the century before. But I'm honored and happy to join you all in this discussion about an amazing initiative that was taken by Jawan Kakar in Kabul. And Jawan belongs to this new generation of young Afghans. And by young, I mean people who are under 50. They are all, I think, under 50. And they have started a number of really wonderful initiatives. One of them is the Qatar Foundation, and the other is the Heart of Asia. What these young people, this new generation of Afghans are doing, they are showing that what progress Afghanistan has made since 2001. The Afghanistan, I think all of us knew before 2001, is not there anymore. And therefore, the people who are negotiating in Doha and may be going to other capitals, some of them do belong to the period before 2000. And they should realize that their country is different now. The country has moved forward. And their negotiations should be able to create conditions for their country to move even more, make even more progress, not pull it back to where it was 50, 60, 70, 100, or 1,000 years ago. So we wish them luck. And we are going to talk about this initiative, Kaun and his friends in Kabul, by inviting a number of people, Afghans and non-Afghans, to provide contribution to this great book that has been published on the basis of these 3 letters that were exchanged between Najibullah and Dr. Kakar. You have just introduced everybody, so there's no need to waste time and introduce them again. It's a very good group to start a discussion. There will be others organized by different people interested in this project to make the book known. I don't know how do you want us to start, but I would like to start with you, Radha. We'll go around and give everybody an opportunity to say a few words for about 5 minutes, and then we will take it from there. Radha, will you say something? If you repeat what you said before, it doesn't bother me because I hear it, but perhaps you don't need to do that. Go ahead, Radha.
You're on mute.
We can hear.
Yeah.
Sorry, I muted my mic in to try to keep the audio good. Well, thank you very much, Lakhdar. This book has come out at a moment when, once again, some form of peace agreement is being discussed. And once again, the problems and the obstacles for that peace process are immense. All over the region, the question of a US withdrawal and whether there can be a peace agreement leading to some form of interim government is at all possible. At the moment, as we see it, efforts and discussions are ongoing, but we do not know what, if any, result will come in the next few weeks, as it is the conference, the regional conference with Afghanistan that was planned for the end of April has had to be postponed. There are people like Barney Rubin who I think can give us an overview both of the thinking of some of the key actors internationally, and also of what is happening with the negotiations themselves. As you know, this volume actually compares the 1990s period to the current situation to see what are the similarities and differences and what are the lessons perhaps that we can learn, all of us. I'm going to just talk a little bit about our region and the issues that concern us. I mean, for India, interestingly, we are far less engaged than we were perhaps in the 1990s or even in the early 2000s. While our aid missions continue, both politically And in terms of security, it seems to me that our conversations have reduced significantly. Nevertheless, there is one new development that perhaps could help for an Afghan peace process as well, which is the quiet, extremely hesitant efforts between India and Pakistan to once more resume peace talks. Now, that might perhaps help at least to take one major problem, if not out of the equation, at least sideline it a little bit in the equation. That is at least a hope that I have. We will hear more, I think, from Afrasiab about that. As far as I can see at this point in time, while our government is holding parallel discussions with different countries that are seriously engaged with Afghanistan, we have not yet evolved a policy of our own. We still seem to be very much in the, well, wait and watch mode. The only voices that we have heard recently are that our government should establish some kind of working dialogue with the Taliban as well. And now I presume that various small track 2 or back channel efforts have occurred from time to time in that direction. But from my point of view, while that is, of course, an important element for Indian analysts to consider, it seems to me that the far greater element is, first of all, how do we engage with all of Afghanistan's neighbors to try and see if we can arrive at some kind of working formulas to help the peace process and a stabilization process in Afghanistan. That is something where we have some knowledge, some experience, and some good relations. And I would certainly have liked to have seen greater initiative in the regional direction from the government of India. The second thing that I think India needs to consider very carefully is that whichever way you cut it, post a US withdrawal, there is going to be a considerable aid required by the whichever Afghan government there is for Afghanistan. And that is mobilizing donors is another area where India can be active. Let me leave it at those 2 points over here and say only finally that the situation as far as India and regional politics is concerned is very different today from what it was during the Najibullah Kakar period. There is a larger regional engagement with Afghanistan. While terrorism and counterterrorism and to some extent regional geopolitics will play an important part. The Cold War element and the kinds of rivalries that we had to engage in during that period and after that period, as well as the kind of alliances that we engaged in, are no longer relevant to the current period. In any case, we've seen realignments of various sorts, which I would say actually broaden the space for engagement for India in favor of some form of peace and stabilization process in Afghanistan. The fact that we do not have to align either against the US or against the or with or against the USSR. The fact that we now have to look at the Chinese engagement in Afghanistan and think of how our relationships with, say, some of the Central Asian republics can help strengthen at least some form of security stabilization. Uh, uh, all of these are very, very different from the situation of the 1990s. And of course, we can see them, as indicating opportunities lost, but we can also see them as indicating opportunities that can be created. Let me leave it very broadly at that. So, Barney, can I ask you to give us an overview of the current situation? And then I'd like it to ask Jawan to perhaps pick up on what is the thinking of youth in Afghanistan, many of whom are very active in different peace processes and civil society groups as well.
Okay, well, Radha, thank you, and thanks to the International Center for organizing this. And more than that, thanks to the Qatar Foundation and the Heart of Asia Society for bringing out this very important book. Let me just say a few words about the book and its relevance. The book is a set of essays by a very impressive array of scholars and practitioners, but it is based on an exchange of letters that took place between President Najibullah of Afghanistan and Professor Hassan Kakar, a historian who was at that time living in exile in Pakistan and then in the United States, and who had been imprisoned in Afghanistan for several years under Najibullah's predecessor, Babrak Karmal. And it takes place at a time after the completion of the withdrawal of the Soviet troops, after the Battle of Jalalabad, when the Mujahideen and their supporters in Pakistan, US, and Saudi Arabia, and in Al-Qaeda had tested the proposition that the government would collapse rapidly after the withdrawal of troops. And Najibullah had shown that even without the presence of Soviet troops, the government could survive, especially because of the large amount of military and commodity assistance that it continued to receive. So the question, at the same time, it was clear that the government dispensation in Afghanistan had to change. And the discussion between President Najibullah and Professor Kakar was about how that should go about, that should take place. That's why President Najibullah was reaching out to the country's leading thinkers, intellectuals abroad who had been alienated from his regime, to try to see if he could form some kind of a consensus with them about the transition. Now, the big difference, there are several things that are in common between that period and now, and there are several things that are very different. The thing that is in common is that the major power, they say superpower, powers are not so super anymore, but the major power that had troops in Afghanistan, then the Soviet Union, now the United States, has announced its intention to leave. The United States is in the process of leaving. The Afghan government, then as now, was very dependent on financial and material assistance for its basic functioning, and particularly for the security services, at that time on the Soviet Union, now on the United States. The Afghan state was factionalized, probably more now than it was at that time. Therefore, the position of the president was extremely important as the one figure that was holding the state together. A lot of the discussion between President Najibullah and Professor Kakar is over how to organize a political transition from one government to another while maintaining the structure of the state, which is the same problem that we are facing today. Therefore, they discussed a great deal about whether there should be an interim government. Najibullah took a position similar to what President Ghani is taking today, that an interim government, that is at least one that is imposed from outside, would destabilize Afghanistan, make it impossible to carry out the transition. Now, obviously, the status of the two governments are very, very different. But let's bear in mind now, but let's look at the international context. There's a superficial resemblance that I mentioned, namely the withdrawal of the major power that had military forces in the country. But something happened after the dialogue between President Najibullah and Professor Kakar that neither of them anticipated and which was decisive. And therefore, they did not discuss it. And that was not just the withdrawal, but the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's very important. It's sometimes overlooked. It's such an extraordinary event, and it's something that, of course, the United States has its internal political crisis, and who knows what would have happened if the rioters in the Capitol on January 6th had succeeded. That was an attempt at a coup, like the coup that took place in Moscow in August 1991 and led ultimately to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But in the case of the United States, the coup attempt failed, and the government is still functioning, and likely it will continue to do so. And therefore, to what extent it maintains its commitments to assist the Afghan government or not, it will still be present politically and diplomatically. That's very important. Remember, in 1992, when the UN tried to install the interim government in Afghanistan, there was no Soviet Union. There was no one who could pick up the telephone or fly in and who had been aiding Najibullah or General Dostum or the various other actors in the what was then the Watan Party, the former PDPA, and try to influence them. And the whole process had been predicated on coordination between the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, today, what's different, first of all, is that the international system is more multipolar, or at least if it's bipolar, it's two different actors. It's the United States and China. And the rise of China, and to some extent the rise of India in particular, have very significantly changed the environment in the region in ways that we don't take account of often enough. The United States does not have the same level of predominant power that it did in the 1980s and 1990s. And that has not only changed the relationship of the United States to the other countries in the region, very importantly, it has changed the status of Pakistan, because Pakistan, which was the base then for the armed opposition to President Najibullah and is the base now for the armed opposition to President Ghani and the current system, at that time was much more dependent on the United States than it is today. Because today, China is actually a peer competitor of the United States. And Pakistan has its relationship with China is, if anything, more important than its relationship with the United States. That has actually empowered Pakistan more in its relationship to India and to Afghanistan, while at the same time impose certain limits on it, because China is not going to support an Islamist agenda in the region, which is against its security interests. Nonetheless, it does support certain interests of the Pakistani state. And that means that there is now a much more multipolar form of attempted coordination. You may have seen last week there was a meeting of the expanded troika, US, Russia, China, and Pakistan, and we hope that Iran will join that soon, which issued a fairly extensive and detailed statement about how to reach peace in Afghanistan. So the question now is, we're managing a withdrawal of US troops as we were managing the withdrawal of Soviet troops at that time. But the United States, unlike the Soviet Union, will remain diplomatically, economically present. And other international actors are much more important. Finally, let's remember, Radha referred to the youth, that the society of Afghanistan is completely different. Now, not that it's not, of course, it's Islamic. There are many traditions that are important. Tribal and ethnic identities are important, but it is a connected society. It is not a fragmented and disconnected society as it was at that time. Over 6 million cell phones connected to the internet. Afghans are connected to each other and connected to the international community in ways that simply did not exist in 1989 and 1990. And I think that creates a much different political situation internally, which we have not taken fully into account. The withdrawal of the troops is very visible. The lowering of aid is somewhat more or less visible, but also taking place. But the rise of connectivity, not just within the region, but among the people of Afghanistan and between the people of Afghanistan and the rest of the world, is a phenomenon which I think will have a fundamental transformative effect on the nature of the upcoming political transition. I won't predict what that effect will be, but I think it means it would be much more difficult for any group to simply seize power by force and think that they can take control of the country.
Thank you very much, Barney. I'm sorry I disappeared again because of I don't know what. So I didn't hear the last part of Rada. But what I feel that both Rada and Barney have told us is that the region today is all important. Of course, what is happening, Barney has again said that Afghanistan is another country today from what it was at the end of the 1980s. But the region now is much more important. The Soviet Union has disappeared, and I think that the Americans, through their own decision and through the changes that are taking place in the region, the Americans are less interested. They are still a very, very big player, but I think the region, the role of the region has improved. I will go as far as to say that in addition to the Afghans themselves, they have a role, they have a responsibility. They cannot, say it all comes from outside, but I think that the region, and to name some of them, India, Pakistan, Iran, and now China, are going to make it possible for peace to happen in Afghanistan, or for this situation to continue or even worsen. The region is all important. Now let's hear perhaps from the man who has coordinated this book and helped make sure that we do have a book now that is in print and that is, I think, on sale. So, Mr. Jawan, would you like to tell us a little bit about the book, and then we hear from Javed the view from Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Radha, and thank you for the India Center for putting this event together during these extraordinary times actually in India. So I extend my prayers and thoughts with people of India. But to go beyond that, I mean, Professor Rubin talked about most of the things actually that I have written down in my own notes to talk about that. So I won't go and repeat about that. I'm going to make a couple of specific points, but before I make that, let me talk about like the big framework of the volume. Obviously, we have 22 essays in this volume, and we try to divide that into 3 broad sections. And the first section deals with an analysis of the letters themselves, which is we have people from the States, from South Asia, from Afghanistan, who have actually gone deep and read and analyzed these letters from different perspectives. And then we have a second section in the book that deals with like themes, state-society relationship. So they deal with the media, they deal with civil society and development and state formation in Afghanistan. The third section, which deals with a kind of wider regional aspect of the war and peacemaking in Afghanistan, is also like expansive. So together we have 22 essays. We have like several contributors who are actually female. That's very important. Something that we considered when we extended our invitations to all their respective contributors. So that's something to take into consideration, and that's important because as I have said it elsewhere, the field of Afghanistan studies has been dominated by men, and that's something very important that we have to make sure, especially at this time, to hear from women as well, and that's something that's so unique about this volume. But to go kind of beyond the book and talk about something that I have kind of framed it in my notes is sort of like South Asia in Afghanistan and Afghanistan in South Asia. That's how I will like look at the region as other colleagues have talked about it. And the point I'm trying to make is that is important to kind of link it to the larger situation that is true of Afghanistan. And that is my understanding is I'm a historian. Peace has never been a priority in Afghanistan for the international community, and I still believe in that. I don't think that peace has become a priority even for the region. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that we do have, this is not a sort of like a blame game here, but we have like solid evidence of serious like military and political interventions in the country, not now, but in the 1990s and before. And that is something, if you read like the letters, obviously the three letters exchanged between President Najibullah and Professor Kakar, in these two letters, they are very specific actually. They do focus on like two aspects of the war and peacemaking in Afghanistan. One is obviously the part that deals with Afghans themselves, and they are very explicit about that Afghans are not doing their job. They are not outreaching to each other. They are not talking to each other. I mean, Professor Barney talked about that point. Mujahideen never recognized the legitimacy of President Najibullah. And I think one thing I should actually add here that hasn't been mentioned, in addition to this English volume, we also like produced a volume in Farsi and Pashto, which is quite actually interesting, because in that volume we have contributions from like a number of like former Mujahideen and members and then members of Communist Party of Afghanistan. In those essays, actually, we can clearly see from Mujahideens themselves that they say that maybe we made a mistake. We should have made actually peace with President Najibullah. So that is something to take into consideration, very important. That's one thing. So I'm not like one of those people who come up with like solutions. I don't know what is exactly the solution for Afghanistan. But as far as I understand and think is that it's not 10 years war, it's not 20 years war, 40 years of war have been going on in Afghanistan. Afghans have been involved deeply in it, and internationals have been involved deeply in it. So that's something to take into consideration. And in these specific three letters, actually, both President Najibullah and Kakar are again explicit about that intervention. And that is something I think crucial. So if we are going to see peace in Afghanistan, it's not just going to come through Afghans. That's obvious. Yes, Afghans can get together probably and make peace. But if we continue to see international intervention in that country, whether that's in the form of military or whether in other form, it's going to be problematic. And peace is not going to be sustainable. And in the letters, at least in Professor Kakar's letter, for example, Pakistan and Soviet Union are singled out. I mean, they are described as half of the problem in Afghanistan. And that is something serious. I won't go into the details of that because Khatak Saib will talk about that in details. And we have a wonderful contribution. And Dr. Kumar, you have contributed a wonderful essay that we don't have that regional framework for Afghanistan to make peace. So that's something. If region is important, of what region we are talking about? Are we talking about region South Asia? Are we talking about Central Asia? Are we talking about Iran? So Iran must be heavily involved. I mean, we shouldn't deal like politically here. I mean, Iran has not only massive interest in Afghanistan, but Iran has massive influence. Iran has been part of Afghanistan, not now, but for like there for centuries, and Afghanistan has been there. So it's very important to take into consideration. And my own understanding is, and I'm seeing this again in the kind of international media and in the regional media, that this war in Afghanistan is being kind of portrayed, again, quote unquote, as some sort of Afghan. That's not true, actually. We should kind of just move beyond that. There is nothing just Afghan about this war. And that's something that needs to become public, understood, and appreciated. I mean, so we have to deal with that. I think rather you asked me about the youth. I wish I was young to tell you anymore, and I'm not in Afghanistan. So yes, I can tell you Afghanistan has changed. Yes, I can give you examples of like girls and boys going to schools, and I can tell you that yes, maybe less than 60% of Afghanistan population, or more than that, or young people like under like 18 or something. But those are statistics that are out, so we can see them. And yes, Afghanistan has changed, but also the region has changed, the world has changed. So on one hand, while the internationals have to recognize that part, but Afghans themselves also have to recognize that the world has changed, and they have to be prepared for that world. So it's going to be, I should actually now use Professor Robin's kind of argument that it's not going to be easy to just simply transition from a state of war and peace in Afghanistan. But one way to just kind of transition probably is to at least recognize that Afghan people deserve peace, not just in words, but actually in action. It's real, and it's 40 years war. So the society has been traumatized, and it's real, and it's real, and we know this in the lives of our family members, and our friends, and in our neighbors, in our villages. So it's very obvious, and that's something dear to me. And to kind of, since this event is being organized in India, and I'm a South Asianist, and by training I'm a medievalist, so I know more about medieval South Asia than contemporary South Asia. From my little interactions or deep interactions with people from South Asia, in Pakistan, in India, I think, yes, we know there is like more engagement now at the regional level between South Asia and Afghanistan, let's say India now and India in the 1990s. But actually that connectivity now is kind of like policy oriented, not public oriented. I don't understand, I don't believe that people now in India know more about Afghanistan than they used to know in the 1990s. And I have met people, actually, they have told me that they used to come for vacation in the 1990s and 80s to Kabul and Afghanistan. You won't see that anymore. So the point I'm trying to make is we need like much more like broader and wider engagement, like people to people, and somehow I don't know whether this is going to be possible, but somehow we have to come that Afghanistan needs to be kept away from this so-called Indo-Pak rivalry in the region. Somehow we have to find a way. Yes, Kashmir is important for people in Kashmir. Yes, Kashmir is important for India. Yes, important for Pakistan. It's important for Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is also important for Afghan. So that needs to be understood. So I will just try to conclude my remarks by saying that my understanding is that we need to find ways to prioritize peace in Afghanistan. And that's something that Afghans have to do it at the local, national level, and Afghans and people in the region have to do it at a regional level, and then at the international level. So something that I'm interested in, and something that's also very important. So I would just end there, and obviously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much indeed. You have made some very, very important points. You know, in September 1999, when I resigned from my first assignment in Afghanistan, I told the Security Council that you are not interested in Afghanistan. You sent me to Afghanistan to try and see if the United Nations can help make peace, but you are not interested in Afghanistan at all. Because it's a faraway country, it's a landlocked, it's poor, it's of no interest, of no direct interest to any of you. But you are wrong, because one day it will blow in your face. It has. And in a way, it has continued to be, a very, very painful thorn in the flesh of everybody. So you are right, people. And you see, I mean, the point I was trying to make when I spoke of the importance of the region and neighbors of Afghanistan, the people who have influence, you have mentioned Iran. Iran has influence, India has influence, Pakistan has influence. The people who have influence, countries who have influence, are the very countries who can also be spoilers. So it is for them to decide, is there national interest in making peace in Afghanistan or in maintaining a state of war? That is it's a very, very important question that, India, China, Iran, Pakistan have got to answer for themselves, to their people, and also to the rest. So now maybe Javid, and we will leave Mr. Rafi up to the end. Yes, David.
Am I mute? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the India International Center. Thank you to Radha for organizing this. It's a wonderful opportunity. And may I also just say that my thoughts and prayers are with the many friends that we have in India, and they're going through a difficult time. It's also in order for me, because I think I'm not only just here on behalf of Heart of Asia Society as one of the two sponsors or organizers of the volume, but also for the Kakar History Foundation, who is chairman. Kaun Kakar is not here with us today. To just say what an honor it has been to work with these amazing leaders who are joining us on this panel as well. It's been wonderful also to work with the many others who are not here, but who contributed essays. As Jawan Shir said, it's been an extremely enriching experience, and we're grateful and we're really proud and honored that we've been able to put it out at this important time. So thank you, and thank you also, Jawan, for the wonderful work that you have done on putting this volume together, on editing it. I won't say anything about it anymore, because I think both Barney and Jawan have covered the whole sort of relevance of the book to today's context. What I would probably say a few words would be more just following on from what Ambassador Brahimi said about the importance of the region, and various others as well highlighted that. But I think you can't really enter the conversation about the role of the region without first maybe very briefly assessing where the US right now stands, because the role of the US in Afghanistan, or the presence of the US, and I use US in a very sort of in broad sense, not just referring to the United States, but to its allies, to NATO, and the entire sort of international coalition or alliance that's been involved in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades. Their presence in Afghanistan has been one of the most determining factors of the region's relationship with Afghanistan. So I think when you talk about the region's role in current times, particularly in the peace process, let's see where the US stands now and what has changed. And obviously, the latest development in terms of the announcement on the troop withdrawal has had many impacts, but I think one very obvious thing that we are seeing, or we have seen it over the past few weeks, is a perception that the US role overall in Afghanistan and in the region, but I think specifically with regards to the peace process, is going to be diminished. Now, that is, we've seen it in statements. That's what the perception is here from where I'm talking in Kabul. This is the perception. I think we are also hearing that the Taliban would, they have a unique kind of relationship with the US, as you all know, but they probably will view the US role with sort of less seriousness now that all the leverage that existed is off the table now. And I think same is going to be true in the region. The region sees that role diminished. The important thing is, before I maybe discuss the region, to just say that this is not helpful. And the US does have a positive role to play, including in the peace process. And it's important to regain whatever leverage that's lost as a result of the military withdrawal has to be regained in other areas. And the examples are, well, I mean, obviously, I think one of the speakers referred to diplomacy. And one of the important areas in which the US role has to be strengthened from now on, even more, would be in the area of diplomacy, whether it's diplomacy with Afghanistan, with Afghans on the 2 sides of the conflict right now, or whether it's diplomacy at the regional level, because I think that's been one of the weak the weaker sort of parts of the diplomatic effort led by Ambassador Khalilzad over the last 2 years, is that at the regional level, I think it has been inadequate, which explains the situation right now in terms of the regional involvement. The US role influence is also very important in terms of the its continued engagement with Afghanistan. The funding of the ANDSF is going to be hugely important. And some sort of, we obviously, we acknowledge that positive statements are being made, that there will be continued partnership, there will be continued support for Afghanistan, there will be funding for ANDSF. But we have also learned that unless these commitments are sort of enshrined or embedded in some sort of a multilateral framework, a cooperation framework, it's hard to really take it seriously, and it's hard to count on it as a predictable commitment. So I think some sort of, I understand that there is some discussion at NATO about whether there may be some sort of a mission, a post-RS, post-resolute support mission that could be that could capture that. Obviously, I'm not talking about continued military presence in any way, but whatever commitment there is, whether it's in financial contribution, whether it's some support to the Afghan National Security Forces, training, whatever that's possible, would be good to have it in some sort of a multilateral framework rather than these bilateral statements of commitment. Briefly about the region, it's much more complex when you talk about the region. Some falsely assume that there is consensus in the region behind peace in Afghanistan, and they basically say so because they hear all the statements that are made. These conferences in which foreign ministers from all countries come, and then they make very similar statements. In fact, it's quite easy to cut and paste and just change the names of foreign ministers. A lot of times when it comes to peace, because who opposes peace? Who would say that they don't support peace in Afghanistan? But I think you only have to scratch the surface a little bit, go a little deeper, and then you see that the picture underneath this sort of veneer of consensus is fractured, and it's fractured because despite very obvious areas of common interest, the region fundamentally disagrees about how to seek the protection of those interests. So, for example, there's obviously you could assume that the fact that Afghans should be peaceful would be something that the region would agree on. Everybody. You would also be, I think, right to assume that there's a shared fear about the prospects or the consequences of a collapse, a state collapse in Afghanistan, of civil war that will easily spill over to the region. That people are concerned about it. So why cannot those sort of common denominators cannot be translated as the basis for consensus building on the Afghan peace? Why is that the region has really not been able to play a role and bring it about, and sort of translate it into real leverage and influence at the negotiation table? Because I think, as I said, number one is that they don't agree on strategy, on how this could be done. The other thing is that fundamentally the region has failed to detach Afghanistan from the geostrategic relationships that they have between themselves. The India-Pakistan question was mentioned before, but there are also others. That's not the only one. And I think the other thing that's been a problem in terms of region's role is that they don't individually, these countries individually have a view about what their role should be or could be, but they don't agree on. There've never been an effort to have a multilateral position on Afghanistan. There are these bilateral discussions, there are trilateral, there are quadrilateral, there is, and then obviously with the engagement of the US and others, you also see this troika and many other formats. But the region has lacked and still lacks. Isn't it surprising that in the middle of this very, very intense situation right now, with the region being deeply involved, we still do not have as a sort of a proper, consistent platform where regional countries can convene and discuss Afghanistan. At the international level, you have examples, but not at the regional level. So that's the situation of the region for you. And very briefly, I know I've probably taken my time, but very briefly, but how maybe we could cooperate. It's very important that to recognize that the departure of the US militarily speaking from Afghanistan is an opportunity for the region. For many, many years, for the past 2 decades, the region has seen US military presence as well. Some have seen it as threats, some as not so. But one thing that they have agreed on is that it's a variable. It's a variable factor. And to have a one variable less means more clarity. So therefore, it is an opportunity. The other thing is that the US, as I was mentioning, I think this sort of diplomacy is now center stage again. But this should be used to, I would say the US should use its influence to to expand that consensus, some of those basic areas of common agreement that exist across the region, and expand on it. Like the fact that troops are no longer there, the fact that everybody agrees, at least notionally, with peace, or everybody sees the threat of counterterrorism and the future of counterterrorism as an important priority. Those could be expanded. I think there are also other things that could be used. Like, I don't, which country in the region would support the return of the Islamic Emirate? I don't know. I can't find one. So therefore, why can't we use these examples of common interest as the basis for that regional consensus that we're building?
You have asked very good questions, Javed. Perhaps we will give a chance now to Mr. Afrasiab to say something, and I'm sure that he will try to answer some of your questions about the role of the region. Please go ahead.
Very much, esteemed Lakhdar Brahimi Sahib, honorable panelists, dear friends. First of all, I would also like to thank India International Center for organizing today's webinar. And I would also thank Qatar Foundation and Qatar Asia Society for publishing the book. Well, I will be brief because very learned and experienced people have already spoken. I would just make a few points. My first point is a comparison between the Geneva Accords in 1988, April 1988, and the Doha Agreement, which was probably in 2020. You see, the first was fig leaf for the Soviet Union to withdraw from Afghanistan and save its face. And this Doha Agreement is a fig leaf for the United States. But if we compare the two, I think the Geneva Accords, although they were meant to be violated and they were violated, but content-wise, they were better than this Doha Agreement. Unfortunately, this Doha Agreement has systematically weakened and isolated the Afghan state and the Republican system. And it has legitimized and empowered Taliban. That's how Taliban, without giving anything, have got legitimacy, released their prisoners, and are now demanding their emirate, or imposing their emirate militarily on Afghanistan. And I think this framework of Doha Agreement was flawed from day one. We have been saying this. You see, when there is negotiations between state and non-state players, the first thing which is demanded by the state players is, first of all, renouncing of violence, in this case, terrorism. And the second is recognition of the right of the state. Unfortunately, these things were not even mentioned in the Doha Agreement. Similarly, the Taliban's sanctuaries were also not a part of the agreement. So in a way, this flawed process, unfortunately, has landed Afghanistan and the entire region in a very difficult situation. This brings me to Taliban. For example, we know Taliban in the past, 1990s, every one of us know that they were the one, it was an edifice for this terrorist syndicate, which launched terrorist attacks in 4 continents in 1990s. You see, these were serious things. Of course, the 9/11 was the most serious, but even before that, they had launched attacks in Asia, Africa, America, and Europe. But you see, they have never been, they have never renounced those things, and they still not only own their past, but they also, even today, have not been able to cut the relations with Al-Qaeda. Even it is part of Doha Agreement, but the reports that have emerged from UN and even US state agencies reveal that Al-Qaeda is there, and there are thousands of fighters fighting alongside Taliban even today. There are 1,000 Pakistanis. We receive dead bodies every day. from Afghanistan, present war going on in Afghanistan, from Helmand, from Ghazni, from other provinces of Afghanistan. So Taliban have not even shown their intention to change their attitude or their relationship with other terrorist groups. So it brings us to another question, because it seems that the US is convinced that after degrading Al-Qaeda, it's not, I mean, the regional terrorism is not US headache. Although personally, I think it is US headache, because unfortunately, it can grow like it grew in 1990s. Even at that time, not many people were agreeing, but then it happened. But in any case, it seems that they think so. So it brings us to the regional question, the question of this region to face terrorism and to face the situation which is developing in our region. This brings me to Pakistan. Pakistani generals are not anymore in denial about the presence of Taliban sanctuaries, because this is their strength. It gives them leverage in international arena, and it also strengthens them politically in the hybrid system which is prevailing in Pakistan. But you see, there is a very real danger of Pakistan getting more radicalized with the ascendancy of Taliban in Afghanistan. We are witnessing regrouping of different Taliban and terrorist groups on the east of Devon line. And it seems Taliban's plan B is being gradually implemented, which they had mentioned in Doha, that if the negotiation process collapses, they will have military attacks. And this, it seems they are going for that. Now, Pakistan has 36,000 religious seminaries, and the syllabus and other things have not been reformed. Other structures which were used in terrorism in 1980s and 90s are still intact. So there is a real threat of Pakistan getting radicalized. Radha mentioned about recent initiative for Pak-India negotiations. Yes, the negotiations were started at the behest of General Bajwa, the Chief of Army Staff, who is the most powerful person in the hybrid system, and Imran Khan started, the Prime Minister Imran Khan started this process on his behest. But then immediately there was resistance, and in 48 hours, the government had to take back its words. And in the last 3 days, I have seen attack from the Hawks, and I see retreat in the camp which was talking about normalization of relations with India. So that, with the rise of Taliban, this trend can grow, and it can really create threats. As far as China is concerned, I think Chinese were expecting that the world will not treat Taliban the way they have. They thought China will sort of integrate them in the CPAC projects, and China will divert their energy to economic activities, bring them to peaceful activities. But probably Chinese must be also disappointed and concerned to see. But what Professor Van Rubin said, that Pakistan is in a stronger position, I will a little bit disagree with that. With great respect, I would say that Pakistan is in a very bad shape because of economic conditions. Pakistan is an economic mess. It is very heavily dependent on IMF. China cannot really be an alternative for American aid to Pakistan, because Chinese are giving loans, and those loans are to be paid back. Pakistan is juggling with short-term economic policies, taking loans from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and IMF. But you see, it is very difficult for Pakistan to violate Western pressure at this point of time. If the West wants Pakistan to change its attitude, there is a lot of leverage that can be brought. But the question is, will the West bring this pressure, or will the West like to keep the pot boiling in Eurasia because of the emerging Cold War in Eurasia, as was mentioned by Professor Barnett Rubin and other speakers? That is a very big question. But I think the Russians have also jumped in the fray, believing that US will not be able to take the process to logical conclusion, and Russians would like to replace American influence in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, that is also that seems to be more of daydreaming, because the ground realities are totally different. So I think the US should keep working with powers the way US worked with China under President Obama, with Russia, with Iran, with Pakistan. I think that is very important, and that seems to be a reasonable solution. And the question of sanctuaries should be raised so that Taliban behave and they come down from the pedestal from which they seem to be dreaming about revival of their emirate, which of course a change in Pakistan will not accept. I'm confident it will not work, but it can lead to civil war, it can lead to destruction, which will have consequences for the region and for the world. I thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed. You have brought us back to reality with some very frightening possibilities if everybody doesn't do what they need to do. It's not possible to sum up what you have said. I think perhaps we have agreed and that we are extremely grateful to Kaun and his friends and the Heart of Asia, the foundation, the Kakar Foundation, for publishing this book. We hope that this book will receive great attention inside Afghanistan, in the region around Afghanistan, and in the rest of the world. The other thing is that peace in Afghanistan is extremely important, not only for the Afghan people, of course, most of all for the Afghan people, but also for their neighbors. And their neighbors have got to be a little bit more responsible, dare I say, than they have been in the past, and perhaps work together and with others to help Afghanistan make peace and not war. I will now pass it on to Radha I haven't said myself at the beginning because I wasn't there, how grateful we all are to the Indian National Center for hosting us, and how much we sympathize with the Indian people in this suffering from this pandemic, like and more than a lot of other people around the world. So I thank you, apologize for being late and disturbing a little bit your proceedings. And Radha, it's up to you it's all over to you to conclude. And maybe ask a couple of questions, see if we can reply to a couple of questions. Radha, it's to you.
Thank you, Lakhdar. There had been a series of questions, the bulk of which revolve around this all-important issue of what happens when the US withdraws. Will there be a vacuum? Will different actors step into the vacuum? What will be the international reactions? How is the region going to behave? Are we going to see again a polarization amongst regional actors? Some of these questions, I would say, have been answered by several of the panelists. Some of them are impossible to answer. We cannot say, will there be a vacuum? At the moment, it seems that we are in a period of innumerable collective and bilateral and trilateral and quadrilateral discussions without any clear consensus recommendations emerging. So what we can say is that this is a time when we would hope that there would be far more active and intense discussion, especially amongst regional, by which I mean neighbors of Afghanistan, to start thinking concretely about what they can do to try to prevent a vacuum and try to prevent conflict re-emerging, whether in Afghanistan or within the region at large. So that, I think, is an issue that hopefully is going to gain more and more attention in the coming days. Other questions. One of the questions was whether there will be a relapse into ethnic conflict. I don't think there will, but that is a question, I think, for other panelists to address. There were several questions specifically for you, Lakhdar. I don't know whether you particularly want to answer them. They're also quite general questions relating to your experience as a negotiator in the past, and how would you see it today?
There is one question.
And finally, of course, please.
There is one question perhaps worth trying to answer, and that is that why, whether we try to invite the Taliban to the Bonn conference. We didn't.
Right.
You know, November 2001, it was unthinkable to think of inviting the Taliban. The picture that was in everybody's mind was that of two towers in New York. But where I believe now the big mistake we made was in January, February, March 2002, when we were in Kabul. It was a very simple question. We asked too timidly, and there was unanimity telling us, forget about it. That question is, the Taliban have been defeated. They have been routed, as a matter of fact. They have disappeared. A lot of people have been killed. A lot of people have been arrested. But hundreds of thousands of Taliban have just melted in the country. Where did they go? This question, some have asked, but there was unanimity. Russia, India, Iran, the United States all said, forget about it. The Taliban are gone. You don't have to worry about them. That was a very, very big mistake. Talking to the Taliban in 2002 would have been much, much better than talking to the Taliban today. Radha?
Yeah. Which adds, of course, to the problems that Afghanistan will face quite soon. I was thinking that perhaps we could just each of us take a couple of minutes to make concluding remarks based on the questions that we've seen. The second set of questions revolved around the issue of aid, social and economic aid for social and economic development in Afghanistan, which again, obviously, will depend to some extent on the security situation there. I just want to say that my concluding remark is that the most critical element is going to be how will the Afghanistan security and defense forces integrate? If the Taliban is going to integrate with them, in which way is this going to be made possible? Are we going to be thinking about some international experts overseeing an integration process? It's difficult to imagine the Taliban accepting something like that, but in the absence of that, how on earth is this integration process going to take place? And of course, without integration, the prospects for security are going to be very dim. Now, when I say that, let me also say that I would again think that the region or the different neighbors of Afghanistan do have to come up with ideas on how to help the security situation. Without that, and without some consensus agreement that the neighbors will not encourage flows of arms and fighters into Afghanistan, which is, of course, a problem that both Dr. Najibullah and Professor Kakar highlighted. The chances of any process of peace taking hold post-withdrawal are going to be very dim. Should we just go around seeing what are the main questions that require answering? Barney, you've read the questions. There are some that are specifically related to your knowledge and analysis. Afrasiab, I think you answered quite a large number of the questions, but you might still wish to say a few words about how a regional conversation by which not just some members of the region, but at least the 8 to 10 neighboring Heart of Asia countries can come back, can revive a discussion, whether it was, on the Istanbul format or whether it was a smaller type of track 2 civil society regional discussions that we did at one time at the Delhi Policy Group. Whether those initiatives at this point in time could help at all is something that perhaps Javed and you could both look at. And finally, let me just say the book is available on Amazon for anyone who's interested in buying it. Barney?
Okay, well, thank you. Briefly, first, I'll just say that there is a decision point for Pakistan coming up, as President Ghani actually highlighted in an article he wrote that came out in Foreign Affairs yesterday. And that is, Pakistan has stated, and the Pakistan military has stated, that it does not want the restoration of the Islamic Emirate in Afghanistan. It provided resources and sanctuary to the Taliban because of various security concerns it had about the role of India and perhaps because of radical currents in the military. But now there are reports, maybe they're a little beyond rumors, that the Pakistan military is telling the Taliban that at this point they have to make some concessions, and that if not, they will meet some consequences. I hesitate to believe that. Of course, one has heard it before. But if there were ever a time when Pakistan might make that decision, it would be now, both because of the change in the situation in Afghanistan and for the reasons that Afrasiab Khattak mentioned. That is, Pakistan does have that economic vulnerability now and is under pressure from the Financial Action Task Force over its support for terrorism. Finally, there's the question of the role of the United Nations. We haven't mentioned that, even though Mr. Brahimi is here. The U.S. has, of course, UNAMA is still there, headed by an SRSG. The U.S. has called for and gotten the appointment of a personal representative of the Secretary General, who will be Mr. Jean Arnaud, to facilitate the peace process. But one aspect, there's one major difference between the U.S. position on the UN and that of the region. That is, the U.S. at first asked the UN to convene the powers of the region to try to reach consensus. And the region, Pakistan opposed that because of the inclusion of India. Russia opposed it because Russia has its own regional process, the Moscow process. And you'll note that in the recent statement by the Troika, the expanded Troika, there was no mention of a regional role for the United Nations. I think this is a serious obstacle because the fact is what Afrasiab referred to as the possibility of a renewed, well, let's say great power competition rather than Cold War on the Eurasian continent is something that could be very fatal for Afghanistan. If the countries in the region do not reach some kind of multilateral agreement on what they will accept and support in terms of the nature of the Afghan security forces, what will be its defense and supply relationships, whether they will be able to establish some confidence building measures about to alleviate the fear that all of them have of covert action by other powers in the region and so on. And I think that the United Nations could play a very useful facilitating role in this if the great powers on the continent, Russia and China in particular, are willing to engage with it. So far, it's unclear. It seems that they are resisting that.
If I may, just on this, the convening power of the United Nations is cannot be equaled, and one day everybody will say, the UN is welcome, but I hope it will not be too late. So the earlier the UN is given an important role, not just a seat around the table, a very important role, the better for everyone. In 1992, if Benon Sevan had been allowed to start to implement the program that he had worked out with everyone, that everyone had agreed to, perhaps that Afghanistan would have been taken in a different way. So I hope that this opportunity is not missed once again.
Yeah, thank you. Javed, you wanted to say something?
I just thought, I think there was one question at least, and probably more about what will happen and what's the prospect of a civil war. And I just wanted to address that. Obviously, if I was actually thinking about something very similar this morning myself when I woke up to a glorious sunny Kabul, so peaceful. So spring in Kabul is obviously so beautiful. It's incredible, and then it rained later on, and it couldn't be a more normal place. It couldn't be more. Couldn't be far from those kind of scenarios. But I wish that I thought that the civil war scenario was unthinkable. I think it's very much a possibility, especially what we are seeing right now is on both sides. In fact, not just from the Taliban side. Here in Kabul as well, the peace agenda or the peace sort of process is losing momentum very, very rapidly. The cancellation of the Istanbul conference was a blow for whatever reason it was. We won't go into it, but it shouldn't have been allowed to happen. And now we, in the absence of a roadmap right now to speak of, the war scenarios are increasingly gaining momentum, gaining ground, and I think that's and especially with the sort of on the other side with on the U.S. Role, decreasing role, diminish, as I mentioned earlier, in the peace process. Who is going to sort of champion a return to this to that process when Afghans themselves are obviously a part of the conflict? So we need champions, and that's why precisely I think this discussion today has been very useful to say that we need regional champions now to take it, to not just be the passive players and invitees to meetings. They actually have to take it upon themselves to just say, well, let's actually do something about this. The Taliban must not be allowed to be able to decide terms. So as I was saying, that this conference must not have been allowed, because right now one of the important sources of this war scenario is a very strong belief that the Taliban have actually communicated. It's not like they are hiding it in the back of their minds. They're actually talking about the fact that that what the process over the last 2 years, from their point of view, was really a negotiation of a US withdrawal. And now that has been achieved. As far as Afghans are concerned, they've never really committed very clearly to an intra-Afghan peace agenda. So, and that has to be created with help of the region. Now, so I'll stop at that.
Very good.
Thank you. Afrasiab?
Yes, thank you, Ram. I will take the opportunity to express my solidarity with Indian brothers who are facing this pandemic. We are with them in these tough times. I would just like to say that for having sort of regional activity, we must focus on reviving these track 2 meetings. And since because of the pandemic, it can't be done physically, so we can start it virtually by virtual meetings. And I think you had great experience, Radha, when you used to have those trilateral meetings, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India. But these were not just trilateral. You remember you would always invite Iran, Russia, Chinese, Central Asians. So that sort of format is very good. For starting this track 1, we need to activate track 2. And I think if situation allows our Indian friends, our dairy policy group, for example, had very great experience. Our friends from Heart of Asia Society in Kabul, they did a great job, and I think they are capable of organizing some of these activities. And we can also pitch in from Pakistan and our diasporas in the Western countries. So I think that is something that we should immediately focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. I was actually going to suggest to Javed that perhaps the Heart of Asia Society and the Kakar Foundation might think of doing some regional dialogues. And we can certainly, I can pass on to you all the notes and so on from the previous ones, as well as
absolutely
contacts.
Well, thank you so much for that suggestion. It's very much what we are thinking ourselves. Some we already do, but I think specifically on the point by Khatak Saib, I think it's no. We would be obviously delighted. So maybe offline we can follow this up. But it's very much consistent with one of the things that we are doing on the track 2 dialogue front already.
Great. Last words to Jawan.
Well, thank you very much, Radha. I think I would like to say that we have to give a chance to peace to Afghanistan. So we have to give it a chance. And I think I agree very much with Ambassador Ludin that there is a possibility that a civil war can happen in Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean that people in Afghanistan want a civil war. So this is something that Qatar Foundation and Heart of Asia Society have been kind of trying to promote it as some form of a civil conversation in Afghanistan. And we had recently an event at Kabul University that why it's important for us that we should actually think positive and move forward and not think of a civil war. So that is something that we should just keep remember. And I think then obviously everyone talked about the role of the region. So yes, it's important, but I think Afghans and Pakistanis and Indians and everyone else in the region should have very open, transparent, and public conversation. I think it's important to be connected to the wider global world, and we are going to be connected, whether we want it or not, Afghans. But I think the future of Afghanistan, as it is actually very well said in the forward note to the volume, that the region itself, like Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, these countries matter more to Afghanistan than the United States. Yes, United States is a major global power, and we can't escape that. But the truth is also that we live in a very different part of the world, and that's something that Afghans have to realize and find their ways around that and work their way. So that's I will end my remarks there. I will definitely encourage everyone to read the volume. I think it's an exciting volume. There are different essays from different people, and I'm sure they are not going to regret from just reading a fresh perspective on what has happened in the past and what's happening now in the present, or maybe not in the future. So I invite everyone to just have a look and read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jawan. It remains for me to thank our moderator, Lakhdar Brahimi, for so skillfully managing to keep us within time, and the India International Center, in particular Tete of the Program Committee, for organizing this book discussion, and Wasim for ensuring that after the first hiccups, the technology has been seamless. And of course, thank you to all of you who were kind enough to log into this discussion and to give us so many interesting questions to answer. I was really impressed to see we have people from, obviously, some from Afghanistan, but also from Turkey, from the US, and from England, and from Pakistan listening in. So thank you again, India International Center, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you all.